I wasn't really shopping for anything. Just wandering through a cozy little import shop in Chicago's Lincoln Square, tucked away on a side street where cobblestones still met pavement. The kind of place that sold almost everything: handmade trinkets, exotic teas, and enough incense to smother a bonfire. It was a Tuesday, and I had nowhere to be. "Hello, Matthew," came a voice I hadn't heard in years, soft but unmistakably hers. I turned toward the sound, and there she was. Catherine. Brown eyes still piercing enough to punch a hole in your soul. In that split second, I felt everything: surprise, anger, a flicker of nostalgia, and finally, a cold, hard bitterness. The kind that grips your stomach and tells you, don't you dare let her see you flinch. "Hi, Catherine," I said, my voice as flat as a Midwestern winter. I went back to flipping through the rack of vintage printed t-shirts as if she wasn't there, but I could feel her presence like static electricity in the air before a storm. She wasn't one to let things slide. "Got a minute to talk? I'll even let you buy me a coffee," she said with a half smile, trying to sound playful. I didn't take the bait. "I don't think so, Catherine. I've got the time but not the interest," I replied, sharp and calm. Politeness wasn't a luxury I planned on extending to the woman who'd torched my life and walked away whistling. She sighed, the way she used to when she wanted to wear me down. "Please, Matthew. Just a coffee. I'll buy this time." There it was. That word, please. She'd weaponized it more times than I cared to count, and damn it, I was too curious to walk away. "Fine," I said, my tone clipped. "But call me Matt. I don't go by Matthew anymore." "Sure," she replied, though her smirk told me she didn't mean it. "I think I've earned the right to call you Matthew if I want." I shot her a look, my lip curling into a faint, sarcastic smile. "Okay, Kit Kat. Have it your way." Her smirk faltered, and I saw the flicker of pain behind her eyes. Good. I hadn't called her that since the days when life was good, when I'd come home after work and pull her into my arms, whispering, "Kit Kat, you're my break from the world." It was a private joke, corny as hell, but it had always made her laugh. Now, it only made her squirm. She recovered quickly, though. "Fine, Matt," she said, her voice quieter this time. "Let's just talk." We made our way to a small cafe tucked in the back of the shop, where an older woman behind the counter greeted Catherine with a nod, like they were old friends. Catherine whispered something to her, and the woman motioned us to a corner table with mismatched chairs. Without even thinking, I took the seat facing the door, a habit I'd picked up in my army days and never shook. Catherine noticed too, her lips twitching in a bittersweet smile. Some rituals never die, even when everything else does. We sat in silence as the woman brought us 2 coffees, black. Catherine wrapped her hands around her cup, staring into it like it might hold the answers to the mess she'd made. My mind wandered, uninvited, to the last time I'd seen her. The last time I saw Catherine, we were sitting in a trendy little bistro in downtown Hartford. She'd called me that morning, out of the blue. "Hey, Matthew, want to grab lunch today?" "My treat," she said. Her tone was measured, professional, like she was calling a colleague, not her husband of 24 years. I was thrilled, though. Things between us had been strained for months, maybe longer. She'd grown distant, quieter. I'd chalked it up to empty nest syndrome after our 2 kids, Ryan and Emma, moved out. Ryan had just landed a job in Boston, fresh out of grad school, and Emma was a firecracker finishing her senior year of college. They were thriving, and I thought Catherine and I were supposed to rediscover our spark now that it was just us again. So when she asked me to lunch, I took it as a good sign. "Absolutely, babe," I said, grinning like an idiot. "Where should I meet you?" "The French place you like, on Main. Noon work for you." "Perfect. Thanks for suggesting this. I've missed us," I said, hoping to chip away at whatever wall had grown between us. She didn't respond, just hung up after a quick "see you there." When I arrived, she was already seated, sipping a glass of wine and scrolling on her phone. I bent down to kiss her cheek. She turned her head just slightly, enough to make it awkward. That should have been my first clue. "Hey, gorgeous. Looking for a date?" I teased, trying to lighten the mood. She smirked faintly. "Let's order," she said, her tone flat. We did. I can't even remember what I got, but I remember she barely touched hers. She played with her fork, moving bits of food around her plate, while I filled the silence with small talk. It was like talking to a stranger. When the server cleared our plates, she finally looked at me, her expression colder than I'd ever seen it. "Matthew," she began, her voice unnervingly steady, "there's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to be direct. I've been seeing someone else for a while now. I love him. And I want a divorce." For a moment, the world stopped. Her words echoed in my head like the hollow clang of a bell. I couldn't speak. Couldn't move. "I've been careful to make this as smooth as possible for you," she continued, like she was delivering a business proposal. "You'll keep the house, the savings, everything. He's incredibly wealthy. He's handling all the legal expenses. I don't want a fight, Matthew. It'll just make things harder for everyone." I stared at her, my throat dry, as she calmly dismantled my life. "I'm leaving for Europe tonight with him," she added. "I'll be gone indefinitely, at least until the divorce is finalized. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder. I was finally able to breathe, I whispered. She looked down at her hands, fiddling with her wedding ring. "I've always appreciated how much you cared about my happiness, Matthew. This is what makes me happy now. You've always said you'd do anything to make me happy." Her words hit like a gut punch. I wanted to yell, to smash something, to shake her and demand to know why. But I didn't. I just sat there paralyzed, as she stood, placed a couple of 20s on the table, and walked out of my life. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Breaking the news to the kids was the worst part. Ryan thought I was joking at first, then furious that I let her leave. Emma refused to believe it entirely. For a while, I think they both suspected I'd done something horrible to her, buried her in the backyard maybe. Eventually, I found out who he was, a billionaire named Gerald Price, one of those guys who owned half of Manhattan and acted like he owned the rest. Catherine had met him through work at an international trade company, where she'd been a language specialist. Turns out, the company knew about the affair and had even helped cover it up. Her boss had sent memos to keep it quiet, all because Price was a major client. I thought about letting it go, but that bitterness in my chest needed an outlet. I sued the company for negligence and harassment, and wouldn't you know it, they settled. A mid-six-figure payout doesn't fix a broken heart, but it sure helps with a mortgage. I came back to the present, sitting across from Catherine in that cafe in Chicago. She was staring at me, waiting for me to say something. "You look good, Matthew," she said finally. "Thinner. A bit more hardened." "Thanks," I said. No warmth. No small talk. She took a deep breath. "I can't believe we ran into each other here. What are the odds?" "Pretty slim," I replied. She always fished for openings, but I wasn't biting. Catherine hesitated, her eyes darting around like she was searching for the right words. "I'm doing a lot of translating these days. Picked up a few new languages. You'd be proud of me." "Proud," I said, deadpan. "Yeah, that's the word I'd use." She flinched but kept going. "Gerald didn't marry me, you know. I'm just there. His showpiece. The American mistress who can speak French at dinner parties. That's all I am to him." Catherine's confession hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had long burned out. I leaned back in my chair, studying her as if she were a puzzle I'd already solved but didn't particularly care to finish. Her hands trembled slightly as she cradled her coffee cup, trying to keep her composure. "So you're his, what? Trophy? Translator? Or both?" I asked, my tone laced with sarcasm. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, a flicker of indignation flashing through the sadness. "I know I deserve that, Matthew," she said quietly. "But it's not what I thought it would be. I'm watched constantly. I have no freedom. I can't even make a phone call without someone knowing." "Sounds like you found yourself a real prince," I shot back. "Why don't you just leave? Buy a ticket, hop on a plane, and get out of there." "It's complicated," she said, her voice faltering. "I live well, very well, but at a cost. I'm under his thumb, and if I tried to leave, he'd make sure I regretted it." She paused and whispered, "Meeting you here, by chance, is the first time I've been alone in years." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "And what, you think bumping into me is some kind of cosmic reset button?" That I'm just going to swoop in and save you. Her face crumpled slightly, but she held her ground. I don't expect anything from you, Matthew. I miss us. I miss you. There hasn't been a single night I haven't regretted what I did. Lying in those big, empty houses, surrounded by everything money can buy, I'd give it all up to go back to our little home in Connecticut. Her words stirred something in me, a mix of pity, anger, and that old dangerous urge to fix things for her. But I wasn't that guy anymore. No, I said firmly, shaking my head. You don't get to do this. You don't get to dump your mess in my lap and expect me to clean it up. Her lip trembled, and she looked down. I don't know what else to say, she whispered. Well, you could start by asking about your kids, I snapped. You know, the ones you abandoned without a second thought. The ones who spent months wondering if I'd killed you and buried you in the backyard. Catherine's face crumbled completely. I wasn't allowed to contact them, she said, tears welling in her eyes. The moment I left, Gerald cut me off from everything. I didn't even have a phone for the first year. I begged him to let me call, but he wouldn't hear of it. I didn't know how to reach them. Bullshit, I said, leaning forward. You could have written a letter, sent an email, something. Don't pretend you didn't have options. You just didn't care enough to try. Her tears spilled over now, and she looked completely defeated. I wanted to, Matthew. I swear I did. I wasn't buying it. Well, just so you know, your son Ryan has a 2-year-old daughter now. Her name's Brianna. Your daughter, Emma? She's getting married in 6 months. Her fiancé's a great guy. His name's Trevor, in case you're interested. Catherine's hands flew to her mouth, and she let out a soft sob. I'm a grandmother. Yeah, I said coldly. And you'll probably never meet her. Or walk Emma down the aisle. Because you made your choice, Catherine. You left, and you didn't even bother to look back. Her sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered all those nights I spent trying to convince our kids that their mother wasn't dead, just selfish. The guilt passed quickly. I was about to stand up and leave, just as she had 3 years ago, when I felt a hand on my shoulder. Matthew, came a soft, lilting voice with a slight British accent. I can't leave you alone for 5 minutes without you chatting up some poor woman. I'm starting to think I should have you microchipped. I turned and saw Pamela, her green eyes sparkling with mischief. Her timing was impeccable, as always. Pamela, I said with a warm smile, this is Catherine, my ex-wife. Catherine looked up, her tear-streaked face pale as a ghost. Pamela, of course, didn't miss a beat. She extended her hand, her expression polite but slightly smug. Lovely to meet you, Catherine. I've heard so much about you. Well, not all of it lovely, but we can't win them all, can we? Catherine stared at her, struggling to process the situation. Pamela turned back to me, placing a hand on my chest. Darling, we really need to go if we're going to make that train. Of course, I said, rising to my feet. I turned to Catherine. Thanks for the coffee and the catching up. I'll tell the kids you said hi, even if it's a lie. She flinched at that, but didn't respond. I extended my hand, forcing a smile. Goodbye, Catherine. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. And thanks for the 20 years you gave me. They were mostly good. She didn't shake my hand. She just sat there, stunned, as Pamela and I walked out into the crisp Chicago air. Pamela didn't ask about the meeting, and I didn't offer much. As we made our way toward Union Station, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The next morning, I sat by the window in Pamela's apartment, watching the gray Chicago skyline slowly wake up. My coffee was hot, strong, and black, just the way life had felt for the past few years. Pamela was still asleep, sprawled across the bed like a contented cat. But my mind wasn't at ease. Seeing Catherine again had stirred something dark in me, something I thought I'd buried alongside the wreckage of our marriage. I had moved on, or so I told myself, but the sight of her sitting there, broken and trapped in the gilded cage she'd chosen, had brought a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Not love. No, that ship had sunk. It was hate. A cold, calculated hate, burning deep in the pit of my stomach. For 3 years, Catherine had lived a high life funded by a billionaire who had no qualms about destroying my family. She'd abandoned her children, left me to pick up the pieces, and now she wanted, what? Sympathy? Forgiveness? No. If she wanted to talk about choices, I was going to show her what those choices meant. I started digging the moment Pamela left for work. Gerald Price wasn't hard to track down. Men like him leave a trail of excess and ego a mile wide. In less than an hour I had everything I needed, his business addresses, social media accounts, and most importantly, a list of public events he was scheduled to attend. I wasn't interested in slashing tires or throwing punches. No, Gerald was the kind of man who lived for power, reputation, and control. Destroying him meant taking away what he valued most, and I had a plan to do just that. Step 1 was finding the skeletons in his closet. Billionaires don't get that rich without breaking a few laws, and I was betting Gerald had more than a few dirty secrets. After all, Catherine's old company had practically been his personal escort service, covering up his affairs. If he'd done it once, he'd done it again. Step 2. Make sure Catherine felt the fallout. Not just as collateral damage, but as a direct consequence of her betrayal. It took a few weeks, but I finally got what I needed. Through a few discreet contacts, one of whom used to work for Catherine's company, I got my hands on a goldmine of incriminating evidence. Turns out Gerald Price wasn't just a cheater, he was a full-blown corporate crook. Insider trading, offshore accounts, fraudulent tax filings, you name it, he'd done it. And he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. A few carefully placed emails to some investigative journalists ensured that his dirty laundry would see the light of day. But I wasn't done yet. I saved the piece de resistance for Catherine. Among the documents was an NDA she'd signed when she started her relationship with Gerald, a legally binding promise to keep her mouth shut about their affair, his business dealings, and anything else that could damage his reputation. Violating it would ruin her financially, and Gerald's lawyers would eat her alive. I made sure she knew I had it. I sent her a package with no return address, a printed copy of the NDA, a USB drive containing the dirt on Gerald, and a handwritten note. Choices have consequences. You made yours. Let's see how it works out for you now. Ma. A week later, she called me. I let it ring twice before picking up, savoring the moment. Matt, what the hell is this? She hissed. You're threatening me now? Threatening? No, Catherine. I'm just giving you a reminder of the bed you made, I said, keeping my voice calm. And if you think Gerald's going to protect you once this gets out, think again. Men like him don't like loose ends. You have no idea what you're doing, she snapped, her voice trembling. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. You wanted freedom, Catherine? Well, congratulations. You're about to get it in spades. She was silent for a moment, then said, You can't ruin my life like this. I chuckled darkly. I'm not ruining your life. You did that all on your own. When the story broke, it hit like a bomb. Gerald's financial empire crumbled overnight as investigators swarmed his offices and froze his assets. Catherine wasn't named publicly, but the whispers started immediately. She became the woman who was kept, who had traded everything for luxury and ended up with nothing. As for me, I stayed far away from the chaos. I didn't need to see the headlines or hear the gossip to know I'd succeeded. A few weeks later, Catherine showed up at my door. She looked older, thinner, and utterly defeated. Matthew, she began, but I cut her off. Save it, I said, stepping outside and closing the door behind me. Whatever you think you're going to say, I don't want to hear it. Her eyes filled with tears. I lost everything, she whispered. And you earned it, I said coldly. She stood there, searching my face for some sign of the man she'd left behind. But he wasn't there anymore. Goodbye, Catherine, I said, turning and walking back inside. As the door closed behind me, I felt lighter than I had in years, and I was truly free.